And we are back. This time with a curious creature that skulked the Arctic countryside during the cold months some 50 years back. Who, or maybe what, was this mysterious figure that appeared in several places over the course of a few months in northern Sweden and Finland in the early 1970s? What was it that got everyone talking about the little man and made children afraid to go out and play? Welcome to a new episode of Stories Lost. This week we look at a number of sightings of what was described as a little man associated with some unexplained bright lights and loud bangs, which became the subject of a number of newspaper articles during the winter of 1971. As some of the sightings appeared to be of a UFO nature in connection to these events, UFO Sweden contacted all observers to obtain more information. This episode is therefore based on the compilation of the cases made by the organization and presented in their magazine UFO Information from March 2nd, 1971. On February 15th, 1971, northern Sweden's largest newspaper, NSD, published an article about a strange event near the small town of Kiminki in northern Finland on February 2nd of the same year. It is 8 o'clock in the evening. Mrs. Manninen and her female friend are driving towards the city of Oulu, in the area of the small town of Kiminki. Suddenly, Mrs. Manninen notices a light phenomenon following their car on the right side of the road. She is frightened and locks the car doors. At the same time, she tells her friend who is driving not to look to the right. After a while, the phenomenon crosses the road and starts following the car on the left side instead. As the object passes over the road, it strikes Mrs. Manninen's ears. The phenomenon continues to follow the two women until they reach an open field, where the object disappears. Shortly afterwards, Mrs. Manninen calls out, "We're going to run over that kid." On the left side of the road, they see a strange face behind the snowbank. When the car comes to a stop, the women realize that it is not a child. Instead, a small creature, about 1 meter tall, is skipping across the road right in front of their car. The creature is wearing a helmet and a green-brown suit. Frightened by the events, the two women speed up and do not stop until they reach Oulu. Mrs. Manninen is shocked by the incident. The two ladies are described in the newspaper item as sober and well-behaved. After the report from Finland was published, a Mrs. Molinder called the newspaper and told journalists about a similar incident. The incident occurred on August 15, 1970. At about 9 p.m., a party of 3 was traveling in a car between Narken and Jokkfall, and then continuing down towards the Luleå area. In the car is the driver, tractor driver Asar Sandberg, 51, ironworks worker Olof Molinder, 44, and wife Martha Molinder, 43. It is dark and raining. About 2 miles south of the village of Narken, just before Laniswando, the 3 spot a small creature. Mrs. Molinder says in a written statement to UFO Sweden, "When we got close to it, my husband said, 'What a strange person.' At the same moment there was a bang. There was a strong white light inside the car and the radio crackled. As this was happening, we saw the little man put his hands to his face, as if to protect himself from the light. At that moment he was about 3-4 meters away from the right side of the car. We all 3 were very scared. We probably should have returned to the same place and investigated what had happened then, or how the man had behaved." Asar Sandberg, who was driving the car, had to brake to avoid driving off the road. Shortly after this incident, he had to see an ophthalmologist, and he also suffered from chronic problems in his right eye. He complained that he could not see. "I'm attaching a picture that looks like the man we saw," Mrs. Molinder continues. "We couldn't see the face, but the coat was short. We have not told anyone we know about this. We found it so unpleasant. It would be nice to get an explanation." UFO Sweden called the driver of the car, Asar Sandberg, and asked for an interview. Here is a transcript of the conversation. "Was it you who drove the car?" "Yes, it was me." Did you notice any interference with the car? Not on the car, but on the car radio. It was screeching, scratching. The flash of light you saw, did it look like lightning? No, it was not like lightning. We all three agreed on that. More like an arc of light or something like that. The flash was very, very bright. You have been close to lightning strikes, so you've seen lightning, but this was not a lightning bolt. It all went very fast, and the light kind of faded down. Can you judge from which direction the lightning came? It came from right in front of the car. I was very confused. The creature you saw, was it moving? No, it was standing still. It was as if he brought his arm up to his face when he came into the light. We saw absolutely no face. You saw nothing of the creature's feet? No, we did not. It was dark, and it happened in the strong light. Everything happened so fast that we didn't have time to notice much. How did the newspaper find out about it? Mrs. Molinder, who was traveling with me, called the newspaper after she read in Monday's newspaper about the incident in Kiminki. If she hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have said anything either. Since this happened in August, we have not said anything to anyone about this. You don't want to make an unnecessary fuzz and perhaps be called both this and that. I don't know what to think about this kind of thing. Do you know anyone, apart from you three, who has seen this man? There are several people who have seen mysterious things up here, but they don't want to come forward with their names. Could you make a drawing of the creature? The newspaper had an illustration. It was quite similar, if you remove the face. I can't say what it looked like. I didn't see if he had a box on his stomach. The rest of the drawing is pretty accurate. Small, scrawny, and with a raincoat-like covering. The area where you saw the creature, is it inaccessible by car? There are no buildings nearby. It is a wasteland. There are several kilometers to the nearest settlement. Have you been to the site and looked for any traces? No, and no one else knew about it, except my wife, who we told in the evening when we got home. You wondered when you saw the creature. What is that little man doing out here at this hour? We thought that perhaps it was some madman who was blowing things up or shooting. Mr. Sandberg provided some additional information in a supplementary questionnaire. A few days after the incident, I noticed that the vision in my right eye was impaired, and when I visited an ophthalmologist in September, a crack was found on the retina of the right eye. I cannot attribute this eye injury with full certainty to the related event, but I admit that the idea is stumblingly close. The ophthalmologist, Dr. Bengt Dahlén, in Norrköping, states for UFO Sweden. It has long been known that eye damage can occur when viewing solar eclipses without effective protection, but not in the form of cracking, but destruction of the cells in the yellow spot. In severe cases, in lighter only swelling, which is reversible. It is also known that lightning can cause cracking of the choroid. I do not know how strong the light effect must be in these cases. Ordinary photo flashes are harmless, even for babies. The same week as the previous report, this note was published in the same newspaper. 2 women in Kelsjärv, north of Kalix, were staying up on the night of Monday, February 15th. They were up in the small hours of the morning playing the gramophone. By pure coincidence, they looked out of a window and saw a strange little figure on the road, some distance from the house. He was no more than a meter tall and seemed crooked somehow. It was pitch black outside, but we saw that the little man was wearing black clothes. On his head, he wore something that looked like a cap. You couldn't see his face. After a while, he disappeared. They were never frightened, but they thought it was a strange sight. There is no such small person in the area. As the women wished to remain anonymous, UFO Sweden was not able to contact them to get a more complete account. On February 26th, the newspaper NSD published another article about a frightening encounter with the little man in the village of Strokon. It is February 16th, 1971. 20-year-old Åke Westerberg is waiting for the bus. It is 6 o'clock in the evening, and it is dark outside. While he stands there waiting to see the bus lights that soon should approach him at a distance, he suddenly sees a little man in black clothes standing on the road about 10-15 meters away from him. "You couldn't see his face? It was just gray," he said afterwards. The little man stands still. Just as Oka is about to move closer to get a better look, he hears a strange growl. Then Oka gets scared and runs a few meters in the opposite direction. When he turns around, the little man is still standing in the same place, and just a few seconds later, there's a light so white that Oka has no choice but to close his eyes. The lights were far more powerful than if someone had turned on the high beam in a pair of car headlights. The glare lasts a few seconds. When he can see again, the little man is gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. He continues to wait for the bus. It arrives 5 minutes later, and he leaves with it. When he returns to the same place later that evening, he brings a gun with him for protection. He walks around and looks for clues, but there is no sign of the man. When he goes to bed that night, he has such severe pain in all his joints that he can't sleep. He recounts the feeling that overcame him. "Before I could finally fall asleep, I felt paralyzed in my body, except for the pain in my joints. In the morning when I woke up, I was no longer in pain." Oka Westerberg afterwards informed investigators that he got a very blurred view of the little man's clothing. "I saw that he was black and clumsy in some way. I couldn't see what he had on his head, but I saw that he had something like a box or lamp on his stomach." Albin Jakobsson, 35, Yakfall, did not see the little man, but still had a strange experience that shocked him. The incident was reported in the newspaper NSD on February 27th. The incident occurred at 19 o'clock in the evening, February 25th. Jakobsson is on a walk on the village road when he suddenly sees a cone of light, which he estimates to be about 2 meters in diameter, which flares up at the side of the road. "For 2 minutes, I was pinned to the ground surrounded by a blinding light. I was stuck like in a vice. The bright light lasted about a minute. For maybe another minute, I couldn't move from the spot. It took 10 minutes after the experience before the paralysis subsided, and I hurried home as fast as I could. Until then, I had thought the story of the little man was nonsense. Now I no longer have any doubts." Jakobsson says that he checked the place the following day, but could see no trace of anything suspicious. However, he is convinced that he has seen an inexplicable phenomenon and says he no longer doubts the stories about the little man, even though he has not seen him himself. Mrs. Anne-Marie Lundback from Overkalix says that she met the little man late on Thursday evening, February 25th. She was then traveling by car between Haparanda and Overkalix. "I was driving past the restaurant 3 Shells in Tura when I suddenly saw a little man on the road in front of the car. He was wearing some kind of coat and could not have been more than 1 meter tall. He had a large lamp on his stomach and a hood or helmet on his head. I was blinded for a few seconds by a bright flash of light. It didn't last long, but when it stopped, the little man was gone too. I stayed in the car for 5 minutes, waiting and trying to see what it was. I saw nothing more. I didn't feel scared in any way as I drove on, but I am absolutely sure I saw the little man." So, 6 reports within a geographical area of 260 kilometers over a period of less than a year. But these are not the only reports of the mysterious little man. In the course of writing this episode, I have come across 3 more cases, and perhaps we will have reason to return to these in the future. Based on their investigations, UFO Sweden writes in their summary that the observers in report number 2 stand out as very credible. They have themselves been in telephone contact with 2 of the witnesses, and as far as they can judge, it is a true event, in the sense that it is clear that these 3 people really experienced what they say. As for the other events, which appeared in the tail of reports 1 and 2, they believe that the veracity is more difficult to assess. Report number 4 is peculiar in that the creature is said to have had a lamp from which the bright light would have come. However, this lamp was added to the little man's general outfit only after reports 1 and 2 were published in the newspaper, and this gives reason to believe that the information about lamps or boxes in Report 4 is an interpretation on the part of the witness. Because in an earlier article, they talked to a ufologist who said that these creatures are often seen with boxes on their stomachs, as for example with the case in Imjärvi, which I talk about in an earlier episode. Well, what are we to make of the little man in the north? With more than 6 reports in a limited geographical area, over a limited period of time and several news articles, we have to talk about the little man as a phenomenon, although it does not necessarily have to be something unknown to us. Finally, it must also be said that even if the observations, as UFO Sweden writes, are of a UFO nature, it also brings to mind the old-time folklore of goblins, gnomes, and witches. As usual, I'll leave it to you as a viewer to decide what you think about this case. Feel free to share your thoughts, questions, or experiences in the comments section. Thank you for watching Stories Lost. This week, I would like to give a special thanks to Henriker and Tveiset for supporting the channel by buying me a coffee. If you also want to support the channel, see link in the episode description.